that we would lift our voices to you, Lord. We'd lift our hearts to you. Lord, that you'd be well pleased with what you hear from us, Lord, and what you see in us. We just want to be your servants, Lord. And so we just thank you for who you are. We thank you for this evening. We pray just upon our time, Lord, that you'd fill us with your Spirit, that you'd give us insight and understanding into your word, that you would just grow us, Lord, in our faith tonight as we hear your word. And so go before us, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, go ahead and have a seat. The youth could make their way back to their class. I don't know if these are his. It's so funny if I had to try to stand behind where he stands, man, like I can't even. It's so funny standing next to him, man. I'm like, man, Lord, if I could have just had I'm still waiting for my growth spurt, and I don't know. I don't think it's coming, but a couple things to be getting ready for. Vacation Bible School is coming real quick, and so we want to be ready for that. Please be praying. We just, I think it was, the week's just flying by. It could have been yesterday, could have been the day before. But we finally kind of got everyone into their groups and who's going to be where. And so we will for sure let you know that on the meeting right before we start. So that's going to be Sunday right before we start. We're having that meeting in the fellowship hall. If you really want to know, you can see me right after service, and I'll tell you where you're going to be positioned for Vacation Bible School. But we definitely want to be praying. I think Denitza said we're just over 100 kids registered right now, and so now we kind of go okay, that's great. Usually we prepare for max 150, and then we get really scared in the last week when people keep registering, and then our heart is to never turn anyone away. And so we just want to pray that just the right amount of kids come every day, that we have enough crafts and food for. We have enough Bible to give everyone. Everyone gets a Bible study, but sometimes they get a little sad if they don't get the same craft or whatever. But even that, we're going to find a way to work through all of that. So, but be praying for all those things. We are going to do things a little different this year. You notice we do the way we check in the kids in the back now. We're going to be trying that in the front. And so just be ready for things to be slightly chaotic on the first couple days, but be praying for us, right? But we really think that's the way to go. We've been praying, and we really think the Lord's with us on that. And so be praying for that. I thought I had another announcement. Oh, just pray for Pastor Zeke this week. He's taking the week off, enjoying a little bit of vacation time. They're up in Montana right now, just hanging and enjoying some fellowship with some friends. And so he should be home. I think he's home Saturday night, if I'm not mistaken. So just be praying for him to enjoy that time. We're back in Leviticus. We weren't here last. That's what it was. Thanks to Kevin. Kevin covered last week. I was doing the high school graduation, had to shake a lot of hands and hand. It's not even a real diploma. It's just a diploma case that you give to the kids. But anyway, it works for the picture. But man, I'll tell you, after shaking all those kids' hands, I was like, I gotta go wash my hands somewhere. This, I don't know. I'm getting more germy, man, as I get older here. So, it was a wonderful experience, but it was, thanks for Kevin for covering for last week. Back in Leviticus, remember the theme is holiness. We're looking at the things that pertain to the Levites. We're looking at a holy people, or what needs to be a holy people in an unholy world. A couple weeks ago, we looked at those specific instructions for the priest. And then last time we were together, we looked at those 7 annual feasts that happen in the nation of Israel, and all of those, how they point to Jesus in one way or another. Now, I was very tempted to just we'll go the next couple weeks with no memory verse. And then I thought, we need a memory verse, So I was looking, we found one in Leviticus 26, verse 12. It's a really easy one because, a little bit of schedule here, the goal is to do 2 chapters tonight, and then next week do 2 chapters and finish Leviticus next week. And then the week after that is VBS week, and usually the Thursday night is the parent night that we have here, so we won't have a regular church service, and then we'll start Numbers when we get back. That's the goal. That's the goal. We'll see. I mean, it might not happen, but that's the goal. And so it's a short verse. This one should be able to be memorized by next week. I'll bring multiple prizes next week. But Leviticus 26:12, I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. So let's repeat. I'll say a part, you say a part. We'll repeat it a couple times and try to get to committing this to memory. So I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. Leviticus 26:12. One more time. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. Leviticus 26:12. Okay, so tonight, like I said, we're going to try to do 2 chapters, chapter 24 and 25. Chapter 24 breaks into 3 sections. I stole this from someone else because I thought it was a great way of breaking it down. And I'm not good at alliteration, but this guy is. There's 3 parts to this chapter: providing of holy oil, preparation of holy bread, and protection of God's holy name. That's chapter 24. And then chapter 25, we're going to look at the special Sabbaths and Jubilees. Is this cutting out? Am I dying with my battery? Or everyone hears it normal? Okay, it's just cutting out in my ears then. Okay, all right. Chapter 24. We'll go through verses 1 through 4 for now, and then we'll just take it bit by bit. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the children of Israel that they bring to you pure oil of pressed olives for the light, to make the lamps burn continually outside the veil of the testimony in the tabernacle of meeting. Aaron shall be in charge of it from evening until morning before the Lord continually. It shall be a statute forever in your generations, and he shall be in charge of the lamps of the pure gold lampstand before the Lord continually." So this first part that we see is talking about the oil for the lampstand that is in the tabernacle. For the first part of this chapter, we're looking at some of the practicalities of the tabernacle, almost going back to Exodus like we did, being in the tabernacle again. And again, it's the instruction manual for the priests that we have here, right? That's what Leviticus is. And so you remember that lampstand, that large menorah, solid gold. It's anywhere from 75 to 100 pounds of pure gold. It's the only light source there in the tabernacle, and it's fueled by this oil that we're talking about, and it's tended to by the priests. And so I really like the 2 parts that we see here of how this works. The people provide the oil. I don't know if you caught that. He says, command the people, they're to bring the oil. So they have a part in what happens in God's work. And then the second part is that the priest, the high priest, would tend to it. It's not just one or the other. It's not one of those things that it's just like, hey, only the priests get to do this part, which is most of how the priestly work works. You remember that this one family gets to do all the work. That's their inheritance, is that they have the work of God. But when it comes to the lampstand, the people bring the oil. And so they get to be a part of it that way. I like what this one commentator says when it says that he shall be in charge of it. From verse 4, it says, he shall be in charge of the lamps. The verb has been understood in slightly different ways. In today's English version, keep them burning. The New International Version says, tend to the lamps. The New Jewish Version says, set them up. The New English Bible says, keep in trim. The basic idea is doing all that is necessary to assure that the lamps are burning at the proper time. The light was to burn continually, pointing like so many things in the tabernacle to Jesus, who is the light of the world. And he never stops being the light of the world. Now, we looked at all this way back in Exodus. We're not going to go all the way back to that. But one of the things I love, and like in Ephesians, it tells us about the church being a body. He talks about how every part does its share. And so, some people might think, well, I want to trim the lamps, and I want to be a part of that. And it's like, you might not get to be a part of that, but you do get to have your part in that. And it's the same as we see in 1 Corinthians with people who could maybe be self-conscious about the giftings that they have, or going, well, I'm not a hand, or I'm not a foot, maybe I'm not of the body. And we could do that amongst ourselves sometimes. We always see it when we give VBS assignments, right? That it's like, oh man, well, I'm not teaching, man, I'm not doing anything. Well, actually, your part's really important. All the parts work together so that everything works, and that's the way it works within the body of Christ. And so that's one of the things that we see here. Verses 5 through 9, talking about the bread that goes there for the table of showbread. He says, you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each cake. You shall set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the pure gold table before the Lord. You shall put the frankincense on each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, an offering made by fire to the Lord. Every Sabbath he shall eat it in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons. They shall eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy to him, from the offering of the Lord made by fire, by a perpetual state. And so here we have this table of showbread. Again, that's also there in the tabernacle. It's one of the 3 furnishings in the holy place, not the most holy place. You remember we have that 15 by 30, right? That's the holy place. And then you have the veil, and then the most holy place, Ark of the Covenant's in there, but we're just talking about the holy place right now. And you have the menorah, right? That's on the one side. You have that lampstand we just talked about. And then you have the table of showbread. You also have the altar of incense. But that table of showbread, that's what he's talking about. If you remember, way back to Exodus 25, that table was about 27 by 18 inches, and it's about 36 inches tall, and it's that table made of acacia wood. It's covered by the gold. It's got the rings on the side, but that table of showbread has the 12 cakes arranged in an orderly, and I love this, a very symmetrical way. 2 rows of 6 representing the 12 tribes of Israel in the presence of the Lord. And the bread is called showbread in Exodus 25, and that literally means bread of the face. This was bread associated with the presence of God. Eating bread together was a mark of friendship and fellowship, and so the 12 cakes of bread spoke to the relationship and the fellowship the people of God had with him. So when he says, I'll be your God and you'll be my people, there's a relationship there. It's not something that's just abstract. God desires relationship with his people. And then we see later Jesus says of what? That he's the bread of life, right? I do like one commentator talked about that it's a symbol of relationship that God desires with his people, because there's those words set in order and continually. The set in order that God desires an ordered relationship with his people. We look all through the scriptures. There's a prescribed way that God says he wants to be worshiped. We don't just come to God and go, hey God, I'm going to worship you on my terms. It doesn't work that way. It's very ordered, and God is very specific about what is in bounds and what is out of bounds, but he also desires for that to be a continual thing. It's not just a one and done signing of a contract, right? You get a contract for something, you sign it, kind of don't think about it. You just put it in the file of things, important papers sitting somewhere over there. That's not our relationship with God. It's a continual thing with the Lord, right? It's a daily fellowship thing with him. And then it says they'll eat it in the holy place. The bread was not only a display in ritual. God wanted the people, or in the priests in this case, of God to actually receive, enjoy, and be nourished by the bread. And it symbolized relationship with him. Also, it was fresh. Every Sabbath, it was changed out. God did not want stale communion. It was continual, and it was fresh on a regular basis. Now, verses 10 through 16. We get into the story, and this is the protection of the name of God. We're going to talk about some blasphemy here. We're not going to talk blasphemy. We're going to talk about an instance of blasphemy here. Verse 10, now the son of an Israelite woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the children of Israel, and this Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel fought each other in the camp. The Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed, and so they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. Verse 12, they put him in custody that the mind of the Lord might be shown them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take outside the camp him who is cursed. Let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and let all the congregation stone him. Then you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, whoever curses his God shall bear his sin, and whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall certainly stone him, the stranger as well as him who is born in the land. When he blasphemes the name of the Lord, he shall be put to death. And so we have this story here of this man who's half Egyptian, half Hebrew. So he would have been part of that mixed multitude that came out of the land of Egypt when the Exodus happened. You remember that there were some folks, well, God's people certainly came out and were delivered, but there were some people who said, we don't worship these gods no more. We're not following what Pharaoh says. We're not worshiping the gods of Egypt anymore. We see that God is superior, and they go out with the children of Israel, and maybe possibly too because they hear who God is and what he's going to give them. There's going to be an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey. And so we have this guy, part of this mixed multitude that comes out of Israel. The crime he commits is blasphemy, which is to attack someone, or especially God, in this case with words. It's somewhat like a modern idea of like verbal abuse, but especially directed against God. The command against blasphemy was given in Exodus 22:28. Now, some commentators say that it seemed that it was common for Egyptians to curse their many gods. The root of this man's sin was that he considered the God of Israel to be the same as the Egyptian lowercase gods, that he might just go ahead and curse them. And so whatever the curse was, it was serious. Whatever happened here, whatever was said and directed toward God. So even though in the midst of a fight with somebody else, whether he cursed that man and the God of that man, or he just cursed God in general, we don't know exactly how it works, but we know that it was a serious thing. And then what happens? They go, well, what do we do? Because we know that Exodus 22 tells us that there was a law or a command that he gave against blasphemy, but what's the punishment? What's the punishment for that? And so they do the right thing here. Did you catch it? They said in verse 12, they put him in custody that the mind of the Lord might be shown them. This is really good. Isn't this really good? Because they don't just get caught up in what would be really easy for this mob mentality to take over. Who's the loudest? Who's the biggest, like, type A, who's going to take charge right now, and we're going to figure this out, and we're going to deal with this, and who's with me, you know? And all of a sudden the people start roaring, and everyone gets excited, and then they go, and who else is half Egyptian here, you know? And Moses goes, hold on. Let's just put him in custody, and let's go seek the mind of the Lord. Let's see it, and doesn't Moses do this? We see him doing this. All through Exodus we saw this. That whenever anything came to Moses, it was like, let me go talk to the Lord about this. It's such a humble thing to do, and it's not easy to do when you're leading a big group of people. And man, this happens from a big group of people all the way down to just leading one or two people. You know, the youth just got back from Knott's Berry Farm yesterday. You never feel more like Moses than being a youth leader at a theme park. Right? Because the kids, right? They're passionate, they're zealous, they want to ride. They go, what are we doing? We're going to go to this ride. We don't want to go to that ride. The line's too long. What do we do right now? Well, then let's go eat. We don't want to eat. We want to do that. You know, like that happens real fast. So imagine if that happens at Knott's Berry Farm with youth kids, how it would happen in a big setting like this. And it's hard sometimes to be that leader, to go, let's seek the mind of the Lord first. Let's not be rash about this. This happens a ton of times within the family, doesn't it? Right? You're at home with the kids, something happens, tensions start to rise a little bit, and sometimes dad gets home and it's like, I don't need any of the facts. You disrespected your mom, and I have to remind myself like constantly that the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. We have to hear the mind of the Lord. And there's nothing wrong that if we don't know exactly what to do, to wait, to pause, to pray, and to seek the mind of the Lord. There's some times when it's like, no, a decision has to be made this instant. It's like, I'm going to wait and pray. And so that's what Moses does here. And again, this wasn't a small dilemma here. The issue was sort of unclear because the man was kind of a foreigner, right? He's half. And so the law of Israel, it wasn't for sure if they were necessarily applied to foreigners just as well as Israelites. And so the question, does the law against blasphemy apply the same way? The law of Moses protected the foreigner in some ways in Exodus 23, so they needed the guidance to know what to do. So, verse 13 tells us, God gives the answer, and then verse 14, it says, because the Lord spoke to Moses. Isn't that great? Now, we don't know what the timetable was on that. We don't know if it was within a couple minutes or a couple days. We don't know. But Moses waited till he had that answer from God. And then he was able to go. The Lord spoke to Moses, and here's what he said. Take outside the camp him who is cursed. Let all those who heard him lay their hands on his head, and let all the congregation stone him. And so that's what happens. Now, what's really cool is that the witnesses, not just everybody, not everyone who heard second, third, fourth hand, well, I heard this, that he said this, and then you play the game of telephone. And by the time it gets like 3 doors down, this guy, might have said something he never said. So what God says is those who were witnesses, those are the ones that will lay their hands on him, and then the congregation will stone him, laying their hands as a pronouncement of judgment upon him. What's really cool is that later in Deuteronomy, there will be a principle that we see that 2 or 3 witnesses are needed for anything. Why? Well, it's real good protection against a false accusation, isn't it? Because it could be that maybe this guy's an Egyptian and maybe, just not jiving with other people. And one person goes, you know what I heard him say? I heard him say this, and so let's kill him right now. And the Lord goes, hold on. Who are the witnesses? Who saw it? And so, again, we see that with God, everything is in order. There is opportunity for mercy and so many of those things. But once the witnesses do agree, then he's going to be put to death by the community. And if God would require a foreigner to be executed for this kind of offense, he would certainly not tolerate the violation among the Israelites. So this is a good lesson for them as well. Verse 17 through 22. Verse 17 through 22, whoever kills any man shall surely be put to death. Whoever kills an animal shall make it good, animal for animal. If a man causes disfigurement of his neighbor, as he has done, so shall be done to him, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he has caused disfigurement of a man, and so shall it be done to him. Whoever kills an animal shall restore it. Whoever kills a man shall be put to death. You shall have the same law for the stranger and for one from your own country, for I am the Lord your God. And so we see all these things that were mentioned back in Exodus 21. So if you weren't here with us, we'll do a quick review. Some people would go, man, this seems to be a lot, Do you really want 2 people dead? Because he says if a man kills someone, he needs to be put to death, the death penalty for killing someone else. Is that really the best thing? Or when he says that if you kill an animal, you have to make restitution. He says make it good, animal for animal. For disfigurement, he says eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc. Now, there's this quote by Gandhi where he says, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. One of my favorite verses in Romans is let God be true and every man a liar. Like God knows what he's talking about. God gives his rules for a reason, and that's who we'll side with. 1,000,000 times out of 1,000,000 is where we need to side with God. Now, what's the deal? Because if you look at that, eye for eye makes the whole world blind. What this is supposed to teach is that there should be some self-control, there should be responsibility, and a society that has strict rules and enforces those rules will be a society that you want to live in. If we stop with this stuff, with strict penalties, do you know what you get? You don't end up with the whole world being blind. You end up with law-abiding citizens blind, and people who have no regard for the law get to see. Because they're not going to stop. But if there are and how do we know this? We live in California in 2024. We see what has begun to happen in a society when we say that there's no punishment for anything now. Right? That you can have people steal things and go, well, it's under a certain threshold, we're not even going to bother prosecuting it. Do you understand what happens when you tell people that there's no punishment to a certain threshold? People are sinful. I don't know if you knew that. Right? We're born with this sin nature that we want to do bad things. And so what will people do? They'll go, I'll do the bad thing all the way up until I feel something for it. So if I don't feel anything for it, a little slap on the wrist for $900 worth of goods, yeah, sure. Sign me up twice. Right? Here, slap the other one now so I could go do the next one. Right? And that's the discipline that God has in place. So what would begin to happen is that people would go, I need to be very careful and measured in the way I behave towards my neighbor. Oh, I just got out of control and I killed him. Well, that's the last time. It's going to be the last time that you get to do that. And so you'd have to temper yourself and go, maybe I should calm down a little bit. Maybe I should slow down a little bit. Maybe there's another way to work this out. Because if I go do this, then I leave my family, widowed and orphaned. So maybe I should think twice about what I'm about to do, if that is the punishment. And same with the other thing. Because here's what it does. And then it stops you even further back. If you just want to get into like a fight with somebody and you're going, we've all been that mad at some point. It's like, I just want to rip their eyes out. Okay, but understand that in that one moment, you can cause yourself a lifetime of misery. So maybe be guarded about it. Maybe be careful about the way you do things. And you have that kind of society, then all of a sudden people are going to behave. And then he reiterates in verse 22 what he just talked about with the Egyptian. That he says, so now, and the law is going to be the same, he says, for the stranger as well as for the one from this country. I am the Lord your God. We're going to do justice. And that's good. So what would happen now, people who would immigrate into Israel one day, it's like, hey, you can be here, but you got to follow the rules that are here. You don't just get to run your own program while you're here. All of us are going to live under the same rule. Whether you were born here or you weren't born here, these are the rules for here. Because we need a society that works together. We need a society that comes under the same rules. And so that's what we find here with God's people. Now, when you get to verse 23, it kind of jumps back into the story. It says, then Moses spoke to the children of Israel, and they took outside the camp him who had cursed and stoned him with stones. So the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. This is great. These are always our favorite verses when we see that, right? Since we started in Exodus. As the Lord said, as the Lord commanded, so the people did. That's what we want to do. We want to be obedient to what God says to do. And this one is an uncomfortable type of obedience, right? Most people don't want to be party to this. Most people don't want to have to do this. And I like how he says the witnesses have to go do this. He's talked already extensively that if you witness something, you have to go. You can't keep your mouth shut just because of what the punishment might be. If you're a witness, you go. And so they had to go lay their hand on this guy. And can you imagine the feeling, the sobering kind of nature of what would happen to go, okay, we witnessed it, we saw it, we're pronouncing judgment on this guy, okay, let's all back up, and now everyone gets to throw rocks. That's a tough scene. And for those who would watch and go, okay, I'm going to be serious about the things that God says we need to be serious about. And so this guy is put to death right there. We're going to get it. And so we see obedience right there. And so the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded them. Great. Chapter 25, we're going to get into something totally different, but requiring just as much obedience to God. Verses 1 through 7. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. What grows of its own accord of your harvest you shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine, for it is a year of rest for the land. The Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you, your male and female servants, your hired man, the stranger who dwells with you, for your livestock and the beasts that are in your land, all its produce shall be your food. Okay, so what's happening here? We've talked about a Sabbath during the week, right? 6 days you work, and on the 7th day you take a break and you rest in the Lord. Here he's saying that 6 years the land is tended to and the crops are harvested and all that stuff. He goes, but the 7th year you let the land rest. Now, I don't know about you, this sounds a pretty good deal. Can you imagine getting every 7th year off? I mean, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Like, I don't know, maybe I just like rest too much, but I'm going, man, this would be incredible. You just work for 6 years. I mean, wouldn't you look forward to that 7th year and go, man, we're almost there. We get to just rest for a whole year. Now, he says, when you come into the land which I give you, the laws were given in faith. Israel still was in the wilderness, not yet in the promised land. As far as Moses and the people knew, they were only a matter of months away. God speaks to him. I don't know if you caught the geography on that. He says in Mount Sinai, reminding us that Israel's been here since Exodus 19. They're still sitting there at Mount Sinai. We're not leaving here until Numbers 10. He says that the land is going to keep the Sabbath. And again, we're familiar with the Sabbath days, but here we're talking about these years. And this was mentioned before in Exodus 23. Obviously, this calls Israel to trust God. They had to trust God that he would provide enough harvest in 6 years to see them through the 7th year of rest. Some say because of kind of how this would land, in the Feast of Tabernacles on the Sabbath year, the law was to be read to the people by the priests. And that is from Deuteronomy 31. So each Sabbath year was not just a time to rest from their labor, but it would be a time of really like an extensive Bible seminar for the nation of Israel. And so the Sabbath year is a radical demonstration that the land belonged to God, and that the people needed to depend on him. They would have to demonstrate faith, trust in God and not in themselves. And so this applied to the grain crops and the fruit-bearing plants. And it's wise management of the land as well. The land does need to rest. We know that now about, if you like to garden or whatever. I tried it a couple times and it does. Yeah, I'm not that guy. But you know now that there's certain nutrients that are in the soil, and if you just keep going with that soil, it's going to turn out bad because you're going to suck all the nutrients out of it. Well, now you go to Home Depot and you get extra fertilizer, and you could throw whatever into the ground, and you could put stuff back in the. But here's the thing: the people needed to be stewards of the land that God gave them. And I don't think it's completely responsible of us as Christians to always go, it's going to burn anyway. Who cares about the environment? Who cares about? God's made us stewards of the land that we live in. So it's not a terrible thing. Now, it shouldn't become a religion in any way, to worship the world or the earth itself. But we are called to be stewards of it. And this is one of the ways that God says, no, the land's going to rest. The soil's going to recuperate. We're going to do that. Now, we see that Israel's failure to keep this command determined their length of captivity. Leviticus 26, we'll see it next week, said that if Israel would not be obedient, God would make sure that the land would get its Sabbath rest by removing the people to the land of an enemy. And this was fulfilled in the Babylonian captivity that we see in 2 Chronicles 36. It is interesting, as we do with anything, we try to get around it. Today, some observant Jewish people find their way around the Sabbath year law. On the seventh year, they sell their land to a Gentile to work it, and then they buy it back from the Gentile when the Sabbath year is over. The Gentile makes a little bit of money, and the Jewish person can say, it wasn't my land on the Sabbath year, so it was right that it worked out, to work it that way. Others observe it by cultivating 6/7 of the land and rotating that kind of stuff. But there are a couple things that were to happen if this were to be followed correctly. And again, it would build faith and trust in the Lord. And also, it would provide a rest for God's people. And everyone got to rest during this time. Everyone got to rest, right? Just like on the regular Sabbath day. The slaves got to rest, the servants got to rest, the animals got to rest. There would be rest. So what would that create? A longevity. Instead of just working themselves right into the ground. Now, the terrible thing about this is a wonderful thing that we see. We don't really have a record anywhere in the Old Testament that the people ever did this. When they came into the land, we don't have a record of them going, all right, hey, it's that seventh year. Let's take the year off. We don't have a record. Now you get the next thing here, verses 8, and this is going to be, I have written 8 through 22, but I don't think it's 8 through 22. I think it's 8. We're going to go through verse 17. 8 through 17. It says, and you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. You shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land. You shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to his possession. Each of you shall return to his family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of its own accord, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its produce from the field. In the year of jubilee, each of you shall return to his possession. And if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand, you shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after Jubilee, you shall buy from your neighbor. And according to the number of years of crops, he shall sell to you. According to the multitude of years, you shall increase its price. And according to the fewer numbers of years, you shall diminish its price. For he sells to you according to the number of the years of the crops. Therefore, you shall not oppress one another, but you shall fear your God. I am the Lord your God. So what is this year of Jubilee? Every 50 years, you get another special year off. At first, you're reading it, you're like, okay, 7 Sabbaths, you're trying to count the years. I love that he kind of just says it. He goes, it's in the 50th year. So you get this double Sabbath. They would have just had a Sabbath in the 49th year, right? Because that, you guys know the math. You get to the 49th year, Sabbath year, rest. But then you get to the 50th year, and they go, hey, this is an even bigger year. We're doing it again, right? Run it back. You get another year of doing that, but it's this year of Jubilee. One of the things that someone had said about it being every 50 years is that most people then would be able to go through at least one in their lifetime, to see this once in their lifetime. Now, the name, the traditional rendering of the name for this special year is Jubilee, which is ultimately a translation of the Hebrew word meaning the ram's horn, because he says you're going to blow that trumpet right after the Day of Atonement on that year, and now you're going to celebrate. He says you're going to proclaim liberty. And so the wonderful liberty of Jubilee was announced throughout the land, announcing that all the slaves were free. And again, we don't have much record of this being observed in the Old Testament. A close example might be in Nehemiah chapters 8 and 10, but even that we don't know that it was ever fully followed. Those slave laws that we saw back in Exodus 21 and that we'll see again in Deuteronomy 15 provide the option of a slave agreeing to remain with his master after 6 years of enslavement. Do you remember that he's supposed to be turned loose, but he's allowed? We talked about a bondservant. When he's supposed to be set free, he's allowed to say, hey, I'm going to stay with my master and that kind of thing. Many believe that the Jubilee even set that slave free. And when he says, each of you will return to his possession, each of you return to his family. So when that trumpet sounded on the Day of Atonement to start the Jubilee, it meant more than just the land receiving extra rest. It was also like a liberation of sorts, which the following verses would explain, that the land was to return to the family that originally owned it or that it was given to. And people, including slaves, were returned home. Verse 13, it shows us here that it says, in the year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his possessions. The land could never be truly permanently sold, but the price would move according to the number of years until the Jubilee. So he talked about in verse 15 and verse 16, it's like, hey, depending on how close you are to Jubilee, that's how you're going to sell stuff. So we know why people would sell stuff, right? Maybe they get into a desperate time financially, and they go, man, I got to sell off some stuff because I got to get the books right side up again, you know. And so what they can do is they could sell themselves into slavery, they could sell their land into slavery. But there was some protections that God was going to give because it was God's land. It's not the people's land. It's God's land. And so the people were stewards of it. The people got to live in it. But you can imagine if the year of Jubilee is in 2 years, you go, my home's worth $500,000. They go, not if I have to give it back in 2 years. I mean, I'll give you 15, 20. Maybe you can negotiate from there. I don't know. But there's only 2 years left. Now, if the year of Jubilee just happened, and you find yourself in kind of a bad place, and now there's another 40 years until they have to give it back, well, then now you're going to get a better chance of getting full, maybe like kind of full pot, get some good return on that. But when that time comes, it has to be given back. Joshua chapter 13 through 21, the promised land was divided among the tribes of Israel. Each tribe was given an area within the land. Each clan or large family unit of the tribes received their portion within the land. So these were the assignments that were returned in each year of Jubilee. And so God had given to a clan or a large family unit what would be theirs forever. To whatever degree it was observed, this system was a blessing to Israel in the ancient world. It meant that no clan or large family unit was forever poor. Every 50 years, there was a reset in the economy of Israel, and debts were canceled, and servants were liberated, and everyone returned to their land. So the economy of Israel under God's law, including the law of Jubilee, found a good middle course between unrestrained capitalism and the oppression of a state-controlled economy. The Jubilee was a wonderful institution and was a very great service to the religion, freedom, and independence of the Jewish people. I like what this guy McLaren says. Debts were to be remitted, slaves emancipated, and so the mountains of wealth and the valleys of poverty were to be somewhat leveled, and the nation carried back to its original framework of a simple agricultural community of small owners, each sitting under his own vine or fig tree. Isn't that cool? Now, sometimes, and again, we live in America. Sometimes we could just think like, no, get more, buy more, bigger, 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 right? And the Lord goes, that's not always the best idea. And again, there's times that we have to kind of take off our, little American hat sometimes and go, God knows better than just the American experience. And again, I love my country. I love where I live. I love so many things. But and you have the fight, right? And you see it everywhere outside, hopefully everywhere else, or not here, but outside of here, you see that, right? That people go, well, it was liberty that made this country great. It was capitalism that made it great. No, it was freedom, you fight. And you go, I think it was that we had enough people that feared God is what made it great. And then you get to a point, though, any one of these unrestrained going in its own direction, and anything, right? Anything, even if it's just a few degrees off of true godliness and true fear of the Lord, it's going to get bad. And so what God does here is he reins those things in for society. And I love it because he's almost like, I can't trust you guys to do this. So every 50 years, we're resetting. Every 50 years. I can't even trust you to go 50 years because I know what you can do in 50 years. But hopefully in that amount of time, you can restrain yourselves a little bit. But that's what's in the heart of man, right? Is to take over, build empires, bigger, better, stronger, faster, whatever. And they want to do that. And he goes, fine, but it goes back. It's going to go back to where it came from. Now there are the provisions that we see. Verses 18 through 22. So you shall observe my statutes and keep my judgments and perform them, and you will dwell in the land in safety. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and dwell there in safety. And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, since we shall not sow nor gather in our produce? Valid question. Then I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, and it will bring forth produce enough for 3 years. And you shall sow in the 8th year and eat old produce until the 9th year, until its produce comes in, you shall eat of the old harvest. You know, just like with the manna and not getting manna on the Sabbath, right? What does he say? He goes, don't take more than you need. Every single day, don't take more than you need. Just get what you need of the manna, but don't take more than you need. And what did people do? They took more than they needed. And what happens? The worms were in it. It smelled really bad. They had to throw it out. He goes, why can't you guys just listen? But then on the 6th day, what did he say? Gather twice as much manna. There'll be twice as much out there. On that day, it won't spoil. It'll be enough to get you to that day. What happened? Some people go out again on the Sabbath looking for manna. There's no manna there. God goes, why can't you guys listen? Well, you can understand there being this little thing going, well, okay, if I don't eat for a day, I don't eat for a day, but this is a whole year. You're telling me to take a whole year off. And so what he says there is he says, the land will yield the fruit and you'll eat your fill. Did you catch that? In verse 19, and you'll eat your fill. He's not saying, hey, it's going to be a lean one this year. It's real lean. It's going to be miserable. You're going to hate it. No. God goes, if you'll obey me, it's going to work out just fine. There's a couple things that would keep people from exercising this faith to keep these years. Because even the explanation, because you go, okay, hold on. So I'm going to go 6 years. I'm going to take the 7th year off. Okay, I start again on the 8th year, but I still got to replant everything. It's not like I'm just harvesting right off the bat. So God gives all the math to them right here. He says, so in the 6th year, he says, I'll command my blessing on the 6th year. It'll bring forth produce enough for 3 years. Because you got to eat in the 6th year. And you got to eat in the 7th year. And before the stuff really grows, you got to get it in the 8th year too. God says, I'll do that. I'll give you 3 years worth. But a couple things will keep us, or keep these people, but also us, from fully obeying the Lord and trusting in God for things like this. 2 things, greed and fear. Right? And it's usually one or the other, and sometimes it's both. So the greed is saying, okay, so you're telling me that in year 6, you're giving me triple. That's perfect. If I work through even half the year, you know how much further ahead I'm going to get? I'm just going to do a little extra work, but then that would turn into like, I feel fine. Everyone feels fine. I don't see anything immediately happening. No one's getting struck by lightning here. I'm going to work through that year because I already have this abundance here in this hand, and now I can make a little more, and that sets me up. And if anyone didn't follow it, guess who I'm buying out sooner? right? I like my neighbor's property. I'm buying that thing from him. And now I have the money to offer, right? So there's this greed in the heart of man that would say, I'm going to go get a little more, a little more, a little more, a little more. But also, there's fear, isn't there? And it's a legitimate fear, I think, sometimes if it's something in just the natural world. If we kind of take God out of the equation, you go, you're going to do what? You're going to go a full year without working. Can you imagine if they had a friend from the other side of the world come? They go, what are you doing? We're going to take the year off. And do what? Rest. What are you going to eat? Well, God gave me extra. Well, what are you going to do in the 8th year? We're going to trust in God. God's going to provide. They go, you're crazy. And they go, maybe I am crazy. Maybe I am crazy. Did God really say, I mean, how did he, I don't know. I don't know. We had hard times before. And maybe God, maybe God doesn't in this time. Especially you get kind of generations away from the people who just watched God take them out of Egypt, right? You remember, later, is it in Judges? I think it's in Judges, where they're like, we've heard of the God of our fathers, but where are the miracles? We haven't seen him. It was a people that didn't know the Lord. And that can happen, and people are going, we ain't doing that. Because what if God doesn't come through? Don't we see that, you guys, even in our own lives sometimes, though? That it's one or both of those things. That sometimes it's like, I just need a little more. I need more. I can't be content until I have the next. I just an extra this much or an extra that much. And I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep pressing. I'm going to keep, and that's not to say we shouldn't have, goals or things. But all of it has to be honoring the Lord. And when it's greed in our heart that's doing it, here's the problem with greed. It's never satisfied. I remember a buddy of mine sharing with me one time. It was when I first had my first real job, and I was making kind of more real money, It was my first not minimum wage job. I was selling cars. And I remember the first month that I made $3,000, and I was 18 years old. And I'm like, this is awesome. I have no bills. I'm like, I don't even know what people do with this much money, And I remember this guy talking to me. He goes, man, I wish I had what you had. Because you seem pretty content with your little pile of pennies right there. And I'm like, this is a lot of money. And he goes, I said that when I first started selling too. And then I got to the point when I made $2,000, I said, I'll do anything I can to make $4,000. He goes, once I made $4,000, I said, I'll do anything I can to make $8,000 a month. And once I made $8,000 a month, I said, it's not even close to enough. I need to be making $10,000 to $15,000 to $16,000 to $20,000 a month. It's never enough. And I thought, yeah, I don't want that. Because what happens, it begins to consume, right? And so you can understand what these people might think of, but in the same way, fear. Maybe you've lost something before. You don't want to lose it again. So I have to do this. And there's times, you guys, that the Lord would tell us, slow down, rest. Slow down, take it easy. And we go, not so, Lord. That's not a good thing to say to the Lord. The Bible tells us that godliness with contentment is great gain. Isn't that what he says to Timothy? And he says, you brought nothing into this world. You surely can't take anything out of this world. So with food and clothing, let's be content. That's tough. That's tough in a culture that keeps up with the culture around, right? The keep up with the Jones mentality. But that's I think Mr. Jones is pretty tired too, though, to be honest. I don't think Mr. Jones is very happy, right? And I think because of that, probably Mr. Jones and Mrs. Jones probably don't get along all the time. So I don't want to keep up with the Joneses. So we got to be careful, right? And we got to slow it down, and we got to listen to what God says. Now, we don't live in this exact country. We don't live in this exact economy where we get every 7th year off, and then on the 50th year, we get double, We don't get that. But the principle is still good, isn't it? Trust the Lord. Trust the Lord. Do what God says God's way. Because there are times I'm tempted. I'm like, I don't want to fully obey that, Lord. I don't want to, and I'll explain to you why I don't want to obey it, Lord. I'll tell you why I don't want to do it exactly the way you say. And I think I can convince quite a bit of people why that's probably the right thing. And the Lord goes, just do what I say. Because we want to be, like he says here, when, again, with so many things that we saw, when God said, go do this, and it said, and you remember the people, when God's given his law, they say, as the Lord has said, we will do. And we see all the blessings for the obedience of God's people. But we also very clearly in the scriptures see what? The opposite. That when the people don't do what God says, and here's the thing, with this, we see so clearly what happens. These people will end up in captivity. They will get dragged by their noses to Babylon because they couldn't listen to this. Because God goes, my land will get its rest. And so now I'm going to create a nation that is bigger and stronger than you, and they're going to make you slaves. And they're going to take you far away, and nothing's going to happen in the land. And the land's going to sit, and it's finally going to rest because you couldn't listen. And I'll tell you right now, I never want God to have to go to that length for me. But doesn't he do that sometimes? Now, he's gracious. He is so gracious, but we can't mistake God's patience, because I can imagine they skip the first 7 year, and they go, nothing happened. Got a little extra in that 6th year. Things are looking good. We worked right through. Get to the 14th year. Hey, nothing happened. They get to the 21st year, and all of a sudden they're going, it's just business as usual, man. And they slowly start forgetting, all the way into Nehemiah's time. He goes, stop working on the Sabbath day. And they have to shut the gates, and they're like, you get out of here. You're not selling today. We have to obey what God says. And so we need to just not worry. And I know that's easier said than done, but we need to trust in God. And we need to be able to go to God and go, God, what do you say I should do? What have you asked me to do? And what will I do? And be obedient to him. Now, we have a lot of verses left, but it's okay because we're just going to go kind of quickly here. Verse 23, it says, the land shall not be sold permanently. We kind of already know that. He says, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me. Now, real quick, we see the principle for what's going to be redemption of the land. God says, the land is mine, and you are strangers and sojourners. Now, that's interesting, because we know in the wilderness, they're sojourning, right? They're wandering through the wilderness. But he says, even when you get into the land, don't forget you're still strangers and sojourners. What does that mean? He's talking about a people that we would see in Hebrews talked about, where he says, a people who long for a kingdom whose a builder and maker is God. Remembering, these people are to remember that this is not their final destination. Being with God in heaven will be the final spot. That's the place that we're to long for. So we know the whole earth is the Lord's, but he says this special place, this promised land, belongs to him. And so it is leased, not really sold. And again, the lease would expire in the year of Jubilee. In addition, the lease could be bought out at any time. In verse 25, we'll see by this kinsman redeemer. And so the promised land never truly belonged to Israel, belonged to God. Okay, verse 24. And in all the land of your possession you shall grant redemption to the land if one of your brothers becomes poor and has sold some of his possessions, and if his redeeming relative comes to redeem it, then he may redeem what his brother sold. Or if a man has no one to redeem it, but he himself becomes able to redeem it, then let him count the years since its sale and restore the remainder to the man whom he sold it, that he may return to his possession. But if he's not able to have it restored to himself, then what was sold shall remain in the hand of him who bought it until the year of Jubilee. And in the Jubilee it shall be released, and he shall return to its possession. If a man sells a house in a walled city, then he may redeem it within a whole year after it's sold. Within a full year he may redeem it. But if it is not redeemed within the space of a full year, then the house in the walled city shall belong permanently to him who bought it throughout throughout his generations. It shall not be released in Jubilee. However, the houses in the villages which have no wall around them shall be counted as fields in the country. They may be redeemed, and they shall be released in the Jubilee. Nevertheless, the cities of the Levites and the houses in the cities of their possession, the Levites may redeem at any time. And if a man purchases a house from the Levites, then the house that was sold in the city of his possession shall be released in the Jubilee, for the houses in the cities of the Levites are their possession among the children of Israel. But the field of the common land in their cities may not be sold, for it is their perpetual possession. Pause just real quick. So I don't know if you caught that. He's saying, everything basically that's sold can be bought back in the year of Jubilee, unless it's a family member. They can come and redeem it. They can buy that land back. We don't have tons of time to get into that. But again, it's so that no one family gets bigger and bigger and bigger and accumulates all this land, and then you have these poor people who have no place to live. There was that exception, and it was said for the homes within a walled city, so like a condo, it's fine to sell. No, just kidding. Single family homes, no. No, if it's inside of a walled city, it's not a large piece of property. It's not real estate. It's not farmland. So he goes, if you have that little place in there, that can be sold. And if you sell it, now you're out. But he's talking about the land, the blocks of land that families would own, that has to be able to go back. And then for the Levites, if the Levites are to sell something, now the Lord is their possession. We remember that. They don't have big blocks of land, but they do have places that they do get to dwell. Those have to be able to go back to them. Okay, let's read quickly. If one of your brethren, verse 35, becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, then you shall help him like a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear the Lord your God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not lend him your money for usury, nor lend him your food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. So what he's telling you, okay, your neighbor who's poor, he goes, don't take advantage of him with exorbitant interest. Well, you're not to make money. Help him, right? And there's this reminder so many times. He goes, I am the Lord, okay? I am God. You don't get to lord it over other people. You don't get to take advantage of someone in that state that they're in. But instead, and again, we would see that later, to love your neighbor, right? Verse 39, and if one of your brethren who dwells by you becomes poor and sells himself to you, you shall not compel him to serve as a slave, as a hired servant, and a sojourner he shall be with you, and he shall serve until the year of Jubilee, and then he shall depart from you, he and his children with him, and shall return to his own family. He shall return to his possession of his fathers, for they are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over him with rigor, but you shall fear your God. And as for your male and female slaves whom you have from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, you may buy the children of the strangers who dwell among you, and their families who are with you, which they beget in your land. And they shall become your property, and you shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them as a possession. They shall be your permanent slaves, but regarding your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule over them with rigor. Just want to point out in those verses, that word rigor shows up twice. That was the same word we saw at the beginning of Exodus of what began to happen with the people when they were slaves. Right? It's that hard labor, the taskmaster pushing them. He says, do not rule over your countrymen that way. Don't do that. They're like a hired servant. You treat them with dignity. You give them their rest. They're working their debt off. You set them free when it's time to set them free. But that rigor, that's out. That's what the world, again, Egypt being a picture of the world, right? That's what the world does to people. Not so with God. Right? And so last, now if the sojourner or stranger close to you becomes rich, and one of your brethren who dwells by him becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or the sojourner close to you, or to a member of the stranger's family, after he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or anyone who is near of kin to him in his family may redeem him, or if he is able, he may redeem himself. Thus he shall reckon with him who bought him. The price for his redemption shall be according to the number of years. From the year that he was sold until the year of Jubilee, it shall be according to the time of the hired servant for him. If there are still many years remaining, according to them he shall repay the price of his redemption from the money with which he was bought. And if there remain but a few years until the year of Jubilee, then he shall reckon with him according to his years. He shall repay him the price of his redemption. He shall be with him as a yearly hired servant, and he shall not rule with rigor over him in your sight. And if he is not redeemed in these years, then he shall be released in the year of Jubilee, he and his children with him. For the children of Israel are servants to me. They are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So that last one, if there's someone, a foreigner who becomes very rich and he buys some Hebrews, the law even applies to him that in the 50th year, he's got to set him free. And they are able to be redeemed at any time. But he says, you can't just go, hey, you're a foreigner, give us our guy back. He goes, no. You still have to pay him. You still have to pay him for what happened. And so someone can repay him based on until the number of the years, until the year of Jubilee. But I love that because he says this at the end about people being servants to other people. It's all temporary. Why? He says, because the children of Israel are servants to me. These are God's people. He says, they're my servants. And he goes, who I brought out of the land of Egypt. None of you guys brought these guys out of the land of Egypt. I brought them out of the land of Egypt. These are my people. I am their God. And he says, I am the Lord your God. So with that, we'll pray. And there's a lot tonight. Sorry about that. Father, we thank you so much for who you are. We thank you for all that you're doing here in our midst, Lord. We love you. And Lord, I pray for us tonight. I know for me, the main part of application, Lord, is remembering, Lord, to trust you, Lord, and to guard from greed and from fear. Lord, I know that those can certainly have a way in me, and there's times that it's just what I think is a good idea, Lord, and sometimes even forgetting to completely consult you on it. And so I pray you'd forgive me for those times and in the ways that I do that. And I pray the same for my brothers and sisters here, that you'd help us to trust and obey you, God, that what you say we want to do. And so go before us tonight, Lord. Bless our time of fellowship. Again, bless our rest tonight. Help us to wake up and get done what needs to get done tomorrow. But Lord, in all of it, Lord, we want to honor you. We want to just spend close time with you. So we love you. We thank you. Bless our evening. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.